committee. Also want to welcome board member Emma Wolf. It's her first time joining us on this committee. Want to welcome you, Emma. And also our independent members, Mark Kaplan and Richard Koo, Audit Committee members. We want to welcome you all to our meeting. Also in our meeting, we have with us our external auditors, Deloitte. We have Jill Stomaya and Darshan Patel, who will be with us in this meeting also. We have the Nycha management team. Members from the management team will be here. Anika Lescott will be joining us. We have Jeffrey Lesnoy. We also have Vilma Uretas, advisor to the chair. And also we have Mr. Jason Goldberg from the legal department. We also have Lano from the CISO. He will be with us also in this meeting. Other members from the Internal Audit and Finance Department, we have myself, Terence Clark, and Anil Agarwal will be in this meeting. We want to also welcome particularly the technical team. We want those from Zoom, those from the Department of Communication, the audiovisual team. We want to welcome you. Certainly without you, we could not successfully have this meeting. And we hope that as we go through today's sitting, it will be a productive one to all who are present. Now, before we go into the agenda, for the records, we want to have just the quick roll call, and I'm going to ask Anil Agwal to just quickly do the roll call for the records.
Yes, so the Nycha's Vice Chair, Mr. Gonzalez.
Present.
Board Member Emma Wolf.
Present.
Independent Member Mark Kaplan.
Present.
Independent Member Richard Koo.
You're on mute, Mr. Koo.
Present.
Okay, then from Deloitte, Jill Stromeyer.
Present.
Darshan Patel.
Present.
From Nycha Management Team, Anika Lescott.
Present.
Jeffrey Lesnoy.
Present.
Vilma Huertas.
Present.
Terence Clark.
Present.
Anil Agrawal, myself, present. Ayat Lee.
Present.
George Lano.
Present.
Jason Goldberg.
Present.
Okay, that's all. Did I miss anybody? Okay, so I think we have everybody there. We can start the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Anil. We will proceed to the adoption of the minutes, approval of the Audit and Finance Committee minutes that was held on June 17, 2021. Are there any questions or any correction to the minute?
I move approval. I second.
Mr. Kaplan, seconded by Mr. Richard Koo. Thank you very much. We want to go straight into the presentation. First one will be Deloitte's draft of the 2020 single audit report. Jill?
Thank you, Terence. Good morning, audit committee members. Good to see you again.
Yes.
So today we're going to take you through the audit of the single audit for Nycha for the year ended December 31, 2020. But before I start, I just wanted to say thank you to a couple of folks who helped make the single audit a success again this year. Wanted to start by thanking my senior manager, Darshan Patel. He is Deloitte's specialist in this area of compliance and auditing grant funds. So thank you, Darshan. He's on the call today. And then a special thank you to Nycha, Jeff, and IAT's team, again, helping us gather all the support required to audit compliance related to your federal funding. I believe there's a slide presentation or slide deck.
While you wait for that,
One moment, please.
while you wait for that, I have one thing that I looked at your Deloitte raising the bar paper, and you say that it's only for the audit committee, management, and others in the organization. Why are you restricting this?
Mark, which one are you looking at? I'm not certain which report you're referring to.
Something that I got that says Deloitte raising the bar. It's got a very elaborate presentation, and it ends with saying it's only for a limited group of people. And it seems to me, particularly since this is a lot of stuff about Deloitte,
I
don't know.
believe that's the Deloitte 21 audit service plan.
No,
Oh, Mark, we'll touch that. I think that's agenda item 3 for today. So maybe we can touch base on that after the presentation of the single audit, if that's all right with you.
whatever you want. I have this problem with your fellow accountants all over the world.
Understood.
Jill, is this the correct presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you. So you can move to the next slide, please. So just a reminder, again, single audit, this relates to NYCHA's federal expenditures. So in 2020, NYCHA received grant funding from a number of awarding agencies and spent the money on expenditures. And because NYCHA spent over $750,000, NYCHA is required to have a single audit performed, the results of which will be submitted into the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget and the awarding agencies. As part of our single audit, we issue a number of reports. We reissue our financial statement report that you saw back in June. We reissue that report in accordance with both AICPA auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. We also issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on an audit of the financial statements performed in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards. This second report is really our report on internal control over financial reporting. And it really hinges on the work that we did back in the springtime. And then the final report is on compliance with, for each major federal program and internal controls over compliance for each of the major federal programs that we tested this year. And then finally, there's a real estate assessment center agreed upon procedures report. We call it REACT for short. That agreed upon procedures report is required because you receive significant funding from HUD. Turning to the next slide. This is a snapshot of what the schedule of expenditures of federal awards looks like within your financial statements. You can see there are a number of major programs listed on this slide. And in 2020, NYCHA spent a total of $3.3 billion. You will see that there are programs here from HUD and from FEMA, which are two of the largest awarding agencies for which NYCHA receives federal funding. As your independent auditors, we perform a risk assessment to determine which of these programs we will consider major and perform additional test work on. During the year 2020, we developed a threshold for determining type A programs of $10 million. So any of the programs listed on the slide over $10 million are considered to be type A programs. And then we have a type B program for which our threshold was calculated at 2.5 million for 2020. So any program that's below 2.5 million, which is the type B threshold, is not subject to audit in the current year. Doesn't mean that it won't be subject in future years. It just doesn't meet the threshold for consideration in the current year. In 2020, there were 7 type A programs, 2 of which were considered high risk. And there were no type B programs for 2020. Moving to the next slide. In the current year, this slide lays out some of the facts that I just described to you, total federal expenditures and our thresholds for determining type A, type B programs. In 2020, Deloitte tested 3 programs as major. Program 14.218, which is your Community Development Block Grant and Entitlement Grant Program, which had a total of $51 million of expenditures. We audited program 14.872, which is the Public Housing Capital Fund, and it had a total of expenditures of $519 million. And the last program we audited was your Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Cluster, which is a combination of 3 awarding numbers. And the total for that program was approximately $1.3 billion. So we tested a total of $1.8 billion of federal expenditures in the year, which is about 55% of the total CFA. As a result of auditing these 3 major programs, we don't have any internal control findings to report to the committee. No material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no instances of non-compliance as it relates to our testing of the compliance requirements. I just want to remind the committee, I know we talked about this at a previous meeting, but because of COVID-19, the Office of Management and Budget did allow an additional 6 months for all 12/31/20 filers in submitting their single audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. The normal timeline for NYCHA submission would be September. For 2020, though, NYCHA has until next month to file this report in the Clearinghouse website. And with that, that concludes my prepared remarks on the audit, the single audit for 2020. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I have Darshan here as well if there are any detailed questions on auditing one of our 3 major programs this year.
I couldn't follow you on the presentation because when I went to gallery view, it did not allow me to see what pages you were on as you were going through your statement. But I just have, I need a clarification on something. And it's right at the beginning. And it's a paragraph that says, it talks to, although it's not part of the basic financial statement, it's still considered an important, I guess, information to be put on the audit. If it's not part of the basic financial statement, why is it so important for it to be part of the audit? It's in the very beginning.
It's in our report. Can you just point me to the page number, Mr. Gonzalez, that you're referring
to? As a matter of fact, it's your letter, Independent Auditor's Report.
That's what I suspected. So.
And it says report on the financial statements.
So their GASB, which is what NYCHA follows, requires that certain information be included in a complete set of financial statements, such as MD&A and required supplementary information related to pensions, OPED. There are a couple other instances where you may have required supplementary information. Those sections of your financial statements are required by GASB. However, those sections are not subject to audit. We look at those areas of the financial statements and make certain nothing within those schedules contradicts information elsewhere within the report. But as your independent auditors, we don't give an opinion on those sections of the statements.
Okay.
So required by GASB, but your independent auditors don't issue an opinion on the required supplementary information.
And that's another word that I'm curious, because it also says that, so basically, according to GASB, it's not the actual, according to GASB, we have to have it in, but it's not because of its context, the actual context of it, right?
No, GASB requires that information be included in your financial statements because they believe that it's important for the reader. It gives context to other areas of the financial statement, such as the MD&A. It gives explanations about what happened during the year as far as fluctuations from prior year to current year. And it gives context as to why things changed or what's happened in the business resulting in those financial changes. So GASB believes it's important that that information be within your financial statements. However, when you bring in auditing standards issued by the AICPA, we don't issue an opinion on those sections.
Okay.
I have a question, Jill. Hi, I'm Richard Koo.
Hi, Richard.
Hi. First of all, let me say hello to Emma Wilf, who's our fourth member. How are you?
Welcome aboard.
Okay, here's the question.
Thank you.
You had mentioned, Jill, that out of the 7 type A programs, federal, 2 were high risk. What did you mean by high risk? And could you explain which 2 programs those were?
Yes, the 2 high-risk programs were the Community Development Block Grant, so program 14.218, and the housing, the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Cluster. So it's 3 different program numbers. It's considered high risk. And the reason it was considered high risk could be for there could be a number of reasons why it's high risk. The reason these 2 programs were considered high risk for the purposes of this audit is because of the last time they were audited. When was the last time they were audited? Government auditing standards state that all type A programs must be audited once every 3 years. So we have to audit your type A programs once in every 3 years. If we haven't audited a type A program in the last 2 years, it must be in the rotation in the current year for testing and automatically marks it as high risk. That's usually the reason something is considered high risk. Although that's changing a little bit today with a lot of the new ARPA funding that's out there now, and a lot of governments are receiving ARPA funding. OMB has actually said certain program numbers, certain grant numbers are automatically to be considered high risk for the purposes of auditing. And that could impact Nycha going forward, depending on where your money is coming from, what awarding agency, and whether or not the OMB circular has automatically tagged that program number as high risk. There were none of those type of programs this year that were automatically deemed high risk by the OMB circular. Other reasons that something might be high risk: last year we audited the same program and we had a material weakness finding or a significant non-compliance finding. That would automatically mean that the next year it's going to be a high risk program. Okay. Again, we didn't have any of those situations at Nycha. Nycha's high risk determination was really because it wasn't audited in the last 2 years and we had to get that coverage in the current year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is Mr. Patel going to go through the federal programs individually that were reviewed? Or is, for example, I'm asking about the Hurricane Sandy money. okay, which was listed as part of the federal programs that were included in the budget or included in the financials. And the question I had was whether or not, and why is that money still being included now? Is there money still being spent on that program over, I don't even know when it started, but it must have started many, many, many years ago, the Hurricane Sandy.
Maybe I can address the auditing side of the question, Richard, and maybe someone on the Nycha team can address the spend on the grant. As far as the auditing of that particular grant program, if it wasn't part of the 3 programs we selected as major, we didn't test that grant.
Okay.
So we tested just 3 grants this year. The Hurricane Sandy was not one of those that was in scope for testing this year.
Got it.
We have tested in the past and it could be in scope in the future, but it wasn't this year.
Okay.
And I'll pass it to the Nycha management team to address Mr. Ku's question on the spend on the Hurricane Sandy grant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure, happy to address that quickly, just to say, yes, Mr. Ku, we are still spending down funds from that event, and the work is ongoing. We're happy to provide you, I know they have like a little sort of 1-pager that we can send over that shares where they are in terms of their progress, what specific developments, et cetera, if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Okay.
All right, if I now ask a question. On page 6, you talk about the costs do not include components that are not reasonably estimated, buildings, et cetera. And when you get over the next page, you point out that because you can't figure out these are, you don't try very hard to put it on as a liability. One of the things I'm looking at is that the loss between capital contributions before is 304 million, and a cost reduction of special item, a decrease in cost expected future costs on lead paint. That's a little bit inconsistent with the statement that you can't reasonably estimate anything. And I'm curious as to what the present value of that is anyhow.
Hi, Mark, this is Jeff Lesnoy. Are you referring to the financial statements, not the single audit at this point in time?
No, single audit. If you look at the thing that's labeled single audit report, and on page 6, there's something about costs do not include that where you can't reasonably estimate what it'll take. And then on page 7, you have a cost reduction of future expected costs for lead paint. So if you can't estimate it, how did you suddenly decide that you can estimate it for that?
I understand your question. So GASB 49, which is the literature that covers pollution remediation obligations, clearly states that costs should be estimated where practical and reasonably estimable. So in most cases, for example, apartment units, common areas of the inside of the buildings, playgrounds, et cetera, we've gone through a lengthy process in order to provide for estimates and provide for liability and appropriate expenses. And we adjust that on an annual basis based on the best information available. There are some areas of the properties which we don't have any statistics or insufficient statistics to estimate. For example, the soil of the property, the exterior of the buildings, et cetera. And for that, based on the guidance, we don't just throw a number on a page because we're not allowed to do that per the GASB 49. So we refer to not reasonably estimable in the clauses there to identify the fact that there could be some costs that are additional to that we can't estimate. So the 2.6 billion or whatever amount you're looking at includes costs that are estimated for apartment units, common areas, playgrounds, et cetera.
And Mark, I wanted just to remind the committee members that of the single audit package, pages 5 through 82 are the same set of financial statements that this committee reviewed back in June, which were issued in June. The single audit is required, the single audit complete reporting package is required to include that set of financial statements along with the schedule of federal awards. So I just wanted to remind you, pages 5 through 82, this committee has reviewed and commented on.
Thank you.
I am reminded of what the judge I clerked for, who was very old, very deaf, and very smart, used to say to me when I said something like that. He said, "Don't tell me, Kaplan, what I did wrong yesterday. Tell me what I should do right today." So forgive me.
I understand.
As his clerk, I got beaten up on that. So some of the questions I asked, probably I should have asked last time.
All right.
Like the on page 8, there's a reference to offset by favorable variances and change in assumptions. And I don't know what those assumptions are.
Well,
So if you're telling me we're foreclosed because we had a shot at it before, I won't give you these comments. But there's something here that I found. For example, then I won't go through all this. If it's set in stone, there's no point to trying to reopen it.
so
But I remain concerned about, I know GAAP doesn't permit you to do certain things, but the whole world knows there's a series of big numbers out there for this stuff. And it seems to me that maybe something should indicate that while it's not estimable with the precision that it requires, that watch out, folks, it's going to be a big number.
You're referring to deferred maintenance, Mark? Is that right?
All that, look, we all know, at least from what I read and I hear, that the authority has a huge hanging liability to fix all this up. And to say that it's not estimable may be right, but not to say that it's going to be a monster number seems to me bothersome when everybody knows it's going to be a big number. I don't know how we handle it, but if I were writing a prospectus with this kind of thing, I try to find some way of saying something.
So, Mr. Kaplan, if I can respond, I think you're right in terms of the financial statements. And I think, Jeff and Jill have sort of outlined what the requirements are with regard to GASB and FASB and, when things are estimable versus when they're not. But I hear your more general question about, are we, Nycha, being clear to the public about all of our needs and what that number is? And I think aside from the financial statements where we have to follow these strict rules, we have been, I believe, pretty forthcoming about our capital needs. We send out our P&A number, our physical needs assessment that we do for the buildings. That number was last at $40 billion worth of capital needs. It's an old number now, and I believe we're in the process of updating that. And we also talk where we can about what it costs us to comply with the HUD SDNY agreement. So I think outside of the financial statements where we do have these very strict sort of rules around how and when it's appropriate to quantify, I do think that we as an agency have been very forthcoming about our needs there in the capital backlog and such. Does that help?
It helps because I knew all of what you're telling me. What I don't understand is why we put out financial statements. The financial statements, we're bound by the rules that are set.
Correct.
But the cover letter, it seems to me, would be well advised to say what you just said.
Sure. And we are already starting our process for the 2021 year end financial statements. So we can include that language in the statements that you will see in June. So in a couple of months, when we update that cover letter, or I should be clear, when Nycha updates sort of the narrative that we include we can try to weave in some of that language to let people know sort of where we are in terms of those costs.
I tell you, the city had the problem with its issue of OPEB. And originally, the accountants didn't require it to be there at all. And they finally put it in the cover letter. And now it's on somehow they managed to put it on a liability. So there is experience with this kind of a problem within the city.
Sure. And, you know, your point is well taken, and we will work with Jill and her team to sort of set the right balance there. But even if it just means, to your point, just noting it somewhere in the narrative, you know, in the letter that we transmit with the materials, we can do that. So it's a very well taken point, and we will incorporate that on the go forward.
Mark, for your reference, in the transmittal letter, we do have a section physical needs assessment, and we talk about the projected cost of all needs, repair and replacement over the next 5 years of about $31.8 billion. So that's not simply just lead. That's all type of capital improvements that are required over time. And that's a number which isn't necessarily bound by all the accounting rules. It's an estimate. It's a much bigger number than the pollution obligation, as you pointed out, and it gives the public an idea as to what costs are out there.
Thank you, Jeff.
Now, you obviously have anticipated this, so, okay.
And Mark, just one more note on GASB and the accounting literature. I know that the topic of deferred maintenance is something that's being thought about and talked about at the GASB. There's no new rules or guidance out at this point, but I do know that there's discussions being had. I've actually taken part in some roundtable discussions with other accounting firms on the topic of deferred maintenance. So it is being looked at. I just don't know what the outcome will be from an accounting perspective.
Well, it's interesting to see what has happened with OPEB, which never used to be on the balance sheet at all. Then it got into a footnote. Now it's front in the eyes because the number is so big.
Right, and it could happen with deferred maintenance. We'll just have to wait and see.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. So just for some clarity on my part. Now, I know that the Comptroller General is the one that has all these GASBs, and I guess they turn around and send them out, and that affects whatever is adopted. It affects our numbers in a certain way that we may have to then change the narrative. So having said all of that, give me an example of a GASB accounting standard that is there, but it hasn't been adopted.
Jeff, you want me to give an example of one that's there that has been adapted? I can do that. I think that the easy one is there's a new GASB related to leases, Victor, which is going to significantly change the presentation of how things are reported lease-wise on your balance sheet and on your P&L. That's not yet effective, meaning that governments don't have to adopt just yet, but it's on the horizon over the next year. That's an example of an accounting pronouncement that's been issued by the GASB, but most governments have not yet adopted. And that standard essentially is going to bring operating leases to the balance sheet, where right now they're pretty much tied up on the P&L only.
So can you speak as to what is the catalyst that urges the Comptroller General to issue or adopt certain GASBs?
It's usually consistency. That's generally what I hear about a lot, is that when GASB gets questions from different governments or different audit teams, they start to see differences in how governments are reporting certain items. Conduit debt's one where there's definitely variation in practice. So in those situations, the GASB either takes on a project or doesn't, depending on need and resources, and then develops guidance so that all governments are accounting for transactions the same way. So everyone's accounting for leases the same way. Everyone's accounting for conduit debt the same way. There's no variation in practice across governments. There's also times where GASB follows the FASB. So FASB governs financial statements issued by non-governments. So usually, you know, your public companies, your private manufacturing companies, those type of companies follow FASB, not GASB. And oftentimes FASB will issue a pronouncement and right on the heels, GASB issues something comparable. So there are a number of reasons they'll take on a project, and those are just a few.
Okay, now this is the last thing I have. I don't know if this is the forum to ask this particular question, but I often hear in many of the reports that you guys do that you're not expressing an opinion or providing assurances, right? I see it in many spots in your reporting. So what would have to be provided or what significant evidence would have to be evident in order for you to express an opinion or provide assurances?
I think you're referring to maybe internal controls, Victor.
Right.
Most non-public companies, so anyone who's not traded on this, like an exchange, they're considered non-public, which would include the government industry. Most times, the auditors are not engaged to issue a report on internal controls. If you're a publicly traded company, your independent auditor must test and issue a report on internal controls. We refer to that as an integrated audit. But in what we call the private space, that's not a requirement. And so when we perform our audit, we look at the internal controls that Nycha has in place. We perform what we call design and implementation testing around those controls for the purposes of risk assessment and how much are we going to test, as you know, as far as our substantive work goes. So we do look at the controls, but we don't issue a report or an opinion on internal controls. If that was something that a client wanted us to do or Nycha wanted us to do, that's a different scope. It's a different price point. A lot more goes into testing and issuing an opinion on controls. So that's why our report lays that out, because we are required to look at controls, and we do that for the purposes of risk assessment and designing our other audit procedures, but not to issue a report on controls.
There was a lot of reading in here, and I still in my head, I still have things, but in the essence of saving time today, being that I haven't formulated the question yet so that it'll make any sense, I'll, maybe later on I'll be able to get to you guys and ask you what it is that I have the questions. Okay? But thank you for that.
Listen, a minor thing. There are, having read this again, there are little things that are clearly missing some editing. I'm happy to give you my marked copy so you can figure out whether I'm right or wrong here. Because there's one sentence where you're missing some words. But let me go back to something where you describe on the mortgage loans, how they went from construction to permanent. You don't say the dollar amount of what ended up being permanent. That's on page 40.
Hey, Mark, I would suggest that you send me your questions and you marked up items, and we will give you responses to those details.
Okay.
Unfortunately, those reports were issued as of June 30th. They were approved by the audit committee and the board. So we can't modify them. However, where there are questions or edits that would be appropriate, we could build them into the next year's, the 2021 report, and make sure we capture them.
I'd be happy to send you this thing, because there are, as anything this long, there are little nits and bits, and you can do as you see fit.
Okay, thank you.
May I make a suggestion for the next single audit, Jill? And that is, since we apparently on the committee have looked at the financial statements that were already approved in June, and the problem is that when we got the packet, it was the first item in the packet. And so it looked like that was part of the single audit. It would be helpful, I guess, in the future to just do what you said originally, which is that the single audit purpose is to look at federal expenditures and so on, and to make that very clear that that's the purpose of the single audit, and then make the financial statements that were approved in June as an attachment or
Yeah, I
as a
think that's-
supplement or something, that so it doesn't appear that this is part of the single audit. That's
Yeah, I think
all.
that's a great suggestion, Richard.
I would suggest in the future that would be done, because
Yeah, we can do
there's
that.
obvious confusion here. Okay. Well, not confusion, but there's obviously a misinterpretation of what we were supposed to have read.
I've seen some audit committees where we actually just leave out the financial statements completely for the purposes of this meeting. So all you have is just the federal
Right.
expenditure documentation and
It's always
report.
helpful. It's always helpful to have a reminder of what we had approved earlier and to see the context of the federal expenditures relative to the total financial plan. That's always helpful. But I would recommend it be an attachment or an appendix or something, as opposed to looking as it is the body of the report. Okay, that's just a suggestion.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Thank you.
I told, one of the things that reading this thing, I agree totally with Richard, but your subsequent event, no, doesn't begin while you do. You don't tie it into COVID, but you have it. All right, I'll send on my scratches. You can do as you see fit with them.
Okay, what's next?
Okay.
Okay.
Is that pretty much it, gentlemen? Hello? Hello? Can anybody hear me?
I
Can
can,
hear you.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Oh.
Just wondering if
Is-
there are
is-
any other
Gentlemen, is that
comments?
about it for Jill and Darshan, or?
No, Darshan hasn't gone yet.
No, I know, but we're still asking questions. Are we done with the questions? And is Mark going to send all of his stuff to Mr. Lesno, Jeff?
yeah, I'll be in my office tomorrow and I'll send them on to you.
Okay. So what's
Right.
next on the agenda?
Next, we have the approval of the 2020 single audit report for the board. So a motion is in order.
So moved.
That's been moved by Mr. Gonzalez. Have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Okay. So we will now move on to item number 5. And that is the Deloitte's management letter, comments for the year ended December 31st, 2020.
Great, thank you, Terrence. So in your package, you received a report to management for the year ended December 31, 2020. It's probably about a 7-page, 8-page document. And within that document, you'll see one comment related to 2020's audit. So we had one control deficiency to report to this committee related to last year's audit. And this comment relates to access security and application and database password configurations. And our observation coming from our audit was that passwords to the Oracle databases supporting the Oracle Financial and Siebel application are not in compliance with the authority's baseline policy. And within our comment, we have laid out what the policy actually is regarding complexity, length of password, account lockout provisions. And in addition, we also noted one user with administrative access to the Oracle financial application where their password was never set to expire, which was against Nycha's policy. So our recommendation related to this observation is for the account settings for the identified parameters to be changed to reflect the IT policy. So making certain that all users follow Nycha's baseline IT policy related to security and password configuration. The authority's policy states that passwords should have an 8-character minimum length, complexity enabled, and 45-day password expiration, 5 passwords remembered, and 5 failed logins before lockout. The user should be reminded of the importance to comply with the authority's IT policy. Management's response is also laid out in the letter, which we found acceptable as a response to this comment.
What evidence do we have that people have managed to get through the system in an unauthorized way?
This comment, Mark, is not saying that anyone committed anything, gained unauthorized access. It's just saying we noted that there were instances where passwords didn't conform to the policy. I've listened to a presentation from the people who are the wizards of this thing for the whole city. You probably know about that group. I can't think of their name. And they told us that the number of attacks on the city system were a staggering number. I'm just wondering whether Nycha has been attacked and knows about it for anything to do with cybersecurity. Yeah, I'll defer to the Nycha team's answer.
So
Go ahead.
great, Jorge, I would love for you to take this question. So Mr. Kaplan, our Chief Information Security Officer, Jorge Llano, is on the line. And so Jorge, I think you're best poised to answer that for us.
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions, Mark. You know that we make every effort to implement a lot of tools that allow us to detect and prevent any kind of nefarious activity from threat actors outside of Nycha. And we do have a number of systems that can provide us alerting when there is activity that is not appropriate. We do have a team that does monitor this activity. We also collaborate with New York City Cyber Command, who also monitors for this activity. We have not seen any activity within the last 18 months that would be indicative of a targeted attack to Nycha.
Wow. That's great. I guess they did.
So
It's the thing that keeps me up all night, so I could tell you that I spend a great deal of cycles and a lot of Nycha money to make sure that our systems are protected.
I think that's okay. It's
So-
a good to have. I have been on the receiving end of something in a company I'm a director of, and we paid rent there to be able to go. I could go back into business rather than go bankrupt. So I'm very sensitive to it.
No, I work with Nycha and other executives that are part of Nycha, and we take security very seriously. We make sure that we educate all our employees on good cyber hygiene. And I think that we have a great cybersecurity program.
I would second that, Jorge. Thank you for all of your work keeping us safe.
Okay.
Thank you.
So having said that, do you find that there's I don't know how to say whether it's one computer or one system not being able to communicate with another system that it needs in order to provide the work?
Victor, thank you for that question. We make sure that all of our systems have a standard configuration and that all of the systems are able to communicate with the applications and other systems that are needed. And when they're not, the employees are encouraged to call the service desk, and a service technician is immediately dispatched to that system.
Yeah, there was a time where there was issues with that, and of course we tried to bring it to light, but I don't recall all the details at this time. but there was a problem because one system wasn't communicating with the other, and many things were left to the wayside and then found out later. I mean, there was no foul, no, nothing crazy, but it kind of hindered all the good work that was being done because it was now delayed. So I'm glad that now they're addressing the issue where Sable, whatever the word is, and the other systems are now communicating to each other and making our jobs easier.
No, I agree. Thank you for asking that question, Victor. We do use ServiceNow, which is a trouble ticketing system, to track all of these kinds of issues on our systems, and individuals are immediately dispatched to make sure that all of our employees are working.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further question?
I have one question of,
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fu.
of Jill. In the report to management dated December 31st, 2020, after you've gone through deficiencies, you've indicated that prior year other matters corrected or not recurring in 2020. One of those was timeliness of providing tenant revenue documents carry forward from 2018, and second was succession planning. What was, do you request evidence of that from Nycha? That, for example, succession planning. Has there been a document on succession planning by Nycha that satisfied Deloitte? That it was corrected or not recurring?
It wasn't a documentation, Richard, but rather conversations that we had with the management team in discussing what their bench strength looked like. And we're primarily focused on the accounting team and finance team, but had multiple discussions with management regarding bench strength and succession plan and hiring plans, and got comfortable that this comment isn't necessary for this year. With all of the initiatives undertaken related to those areas of hiring and bench strength and internal promotions. Related to timeliness of providing tenant revenue, we test tenant revenue every single year as part of our audit, and the documentation that we requested during 2020 was provided timely. In years past, it did take quite some time for documentation to make its way from the developments to the audit team. This year, we did not experience that. So we were satisfied that this comment didn't need to recur this year.
May I make a suggestion to management of Nycha? That it seems to me that it would be helpful to have a succession planning document, particularly as it relates to the financial sections of Nycha, the controller's office, finance office, and so on, because of the high number of retirements. I would request or suggest that perhaps a document be prepared within the next year or so.
Mr. Koo, thank you for that suggestion, and we're happy to share that with you. Jeff and I discussed it in relation to the prior comments, and we sort of came up with a plan, as Jill mentioned, to figure out how to promote individuals who have been here, how to grow our bench, how to bring on new talent into the organization. And we're happy to sort of, update that as we have been doing continuously internally and share that, even if it's just a one pager to let you know, here's our thinking on this matter, and here's how we're progressing.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. We can offer that as a follow-up item.
I thought it was very interesting because I've not seen that from other firms. So.
The succession planning comment, Mark?
Yep.
I've issued that comment a couple of times. When there's concerns around retirement, not having, a backup for a controller position or a director of accounting position, things of that nature, where it could significantly impact the preparation of the financial statements.
I thought it was a wonderful comment. I hadn't seen much of it. That's all.
Yeah. The language it came from, I think if I remember correctly, it was from the Government Audit Quality Center. It's an AICPA, a Government Audit Quality Center website, and they had a couple years ago a comment posted out there for the general public to see related to succession planning. So
I thought it was very good. I so much so I kept a copy myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koo. Thank you, Mr. Kaplan.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further comment on the management letter.
Terrence, I have one item. I just
Yes.
wanted to, I realized that when you did the single audit approval that we had Mr. Gonzalez put in the motion, Mr. Kaplan seconded the motion, but I don't believe that I heard a vote for all of the members to formally.
Nycha was flagging that as well. Just take a
Okay.
formal vote, Terrence.
That's correct.
In
That's
favor.
correct. Thanks for the point of order there. Okay,
Wilma
let's
has
just,
trained me well.
let us take the vote on the
What is the motion?
The motion is for the approval of the 2020 single audit report to the Nycha board.
Okay. So you've gotten a motion by Mr. Kaplan.
It was moved and it was seconded, yes. Let
Okay.
me hear the vote from the members.
Okay, I
All those
approve.
who-
Richard Koo approves.
Victor Gonzalez approved.
I approve.
Approve. This is Emma Wolf.
Do we have a fourth?
You just heard her.
Thank you.
Everyone voted. We can move on. Terrence,
Everyone
we can-
voted. Thanks
Thank
much.
you.
All right, we move on to Deloitte's audit service plan for Nycha 2020-21 single audit.
all right, now that we're wrapped up with 2020, that was the last of the 2020 audits. Now we're moving into 2021 audits. So in front of you or in your package, you should have Deloitte's 2021 client service plan.
Yes. What did I do with the damn thing? Okay.
So the first couple of pages just highlight our executive summary, some of our technology and tools, our quality ratings when compared to some of our peers from a public company perspective. So I'm really going to take you to page 8, and that's where I'm going to begin my discussion today. But if you have any questions in the first 7 pages, I can certainly answer them. So the 2020 audit, we are in our planning stages of and for preparing for the 2021 audits of both the New York City Housing Authority as well as both of the 2 LLC companies, as well as our single audit for 2021. I know we just finished 2020, but we are starting the planning for 2021. This year's team looks very similar to last year. I will lead our audit efforts. And I'll be supported by Darshan Patel, who's my senior manager. In addition to Darshan and I, we also have a second level partner or quality control partner, Greg Coslow, who will be a resource for both Darshan and I if we have any questions or any accounting matters that need further discussion or consultation. Greg will be our first point of contact on those type of matters. Greg also served as your quality control reviewer last year, so he is familiar with the organization and your financial statements. In addition, we have our lead senior, Santiago Jaramillo. He really runs the day-to-day efforts of our audits. He's been serving Nycha for, I think now he's going into his 4th year. And he'll be returning again this year along with Clinton Lee, who's been on the Nycha engagement for the last 2 years. So a lot of continuity, happy to report. I know in this day and age of great resignation, sometimes it's hard to keep the same team together, but we have managed to do it for Nycha, and I'm very excited about that. moving to the next slide, page 9, you'll see some of our faces. In addition to the folks I mentioned, we also have a number of specialists that support the core audit team. I lean on them quite a bit, actually, my specialists. John Potts is one of my key specialists. He's an actuary in our Deloitte human capital group. John really is my right-hand man when it comes to reviewing items like pension and OPEB, really large estimates and liabilities on the balance sheet for Nycha. I bring in John to help review that actuarial work performed by the city. John's been on this engagement for a number of years as well. Dan Leff is another specialist serving Nycha for a number of years. He reviews Nycha's claims liability, so anything related to property, casualty, general liability claims, those type of things. Dan Leff comes in and helps support the audit team reviewing those actuarial reports done by your third-party specialist. And then Amelia McGuire, she's my IT director. She really leads our effort in testing around IT security controls. And she's recurring on the team as well. So our audit approach is really what we call a risk-based audit approach. We spend a lot of time in our planning stage of the audit, refreshing our understanding of Nycha and its business, understanding changes that may have occurred during the year, whether it's business changes, process change where it may impact internal controls, or accounting changes, whether or not there was anything changing from an accounting policy perspective. Our risk assessment is really, we want to focus on the items in the financial statement that have an impact, that matter. And part of that has to do with scoping and materiality. So when we perform our risk assessment, we are looking at dollar amounts. So we generally audit all of your big accounts, large dollar amount accounts. But then also we're looking at it through a qualitative lens. Are there other account balances that may not be so large, but have risk from a qualitative perspective? Have more estimates involved on the part of management, things of that nature. Moving to the next page. So at this point in time, and it could change because our audit plan is a fluid document, so to speak, where it could change tomorrow if something were to occur or an event were to occur, or if someone were to uncover fraud. I mean, our audit plan constantly changes, or could constantly change depending on facts and circumstances. So at this point in time, we've only identified one significant risk for our audit, and it's a significant risk that we have at all of our for all of our audits. All of our clients have the same significant risk, and it relates to management override of controls. And that's just, it's pervasive, and so to the financial statements as a whole. And so we do direct and focus procedures to address the risk of management override of controls. We look at journal entries posted throughout the year to understand if there's a business purpose for the journal entry. Was it reviewed? Was it approved? We're looking at journal entries posted throughout the year that may seem odd. For instance, if we saw the CEO or posting a journal entry, we would ask, why would someone like the CEO be posting a journal entry? Those are some of the flags that we would look for that could indicate management override of controls. Other examples could be working on the weekend. If Nycha historically doesn't have a team in the field working on the weekends, and we see entries posted on the weekend, we might flag those and do additional audit procedures around those entries to make certain they are appropriate. Journal entries that are nice round numbers sometimes are an indication of fraud. Not always, but sometimes. And so that's another flag that we would raise if we saw a number of journal entries for nice round numbers, such as, let's say, $10 million. We see that same journal entry 4 or 5 times throughout the year in that same amount. We would flag it and look at it. We also look at estimates, key estimates made by management throughout the year to determine whether or not they're appropriate, if they have any bias. And that's why we bring in a number of our specialists to help us do that work. We had management override of controls pegged as a significant last year as well for Nycha's 2020 audit. So there's consistency there. Aside from that one significant risk that we've identified, we also have outlined here on this slide some additional areas of focus for our 2021 audit, not considered significant risk, but just areas of focus. Your capital assets, including your construction in progress, we'll look at that. Cash investments in debt. I mentioned pension and other post-employment liabilities and claims liabilities. Tenant revenues and receivables. We look at this every year, and we will again this year. It's just a large number on your financial statements. Subsidies and grant revenue. Environmental pollution remediation liabilities. These are the GASB 49 liabilities Jeff mentioned earlier. Any real estate transactions, if there's any new real estate transactions that Nycha entered into during 2021, we will spend time reviewing those. And last but not least is COVID-19 considerations. I know we're kind of, we're now what, 2.5 years into COVID from an audit perspective anyway. And so this is becoming normal, but we will spend time looking at items like funding, cash flows, and going concern as it relates to COVID-19. And any additional COVID-19 funding coming from the federal government. I know there's a number of different programs from CARES to ARPA to CARISA. So any funding coming to Nycha from those types of sources, we'll take a look at. We don't plan to use the work of internal audit function. This just means we won't use the internal audit group in a direct assistance capacity. We do have conversations with Nycha's internal audit team. We do review internal audit reports as part of our risk assessment procedures. But they won't perform any direct assistance in testing account balances during the year. And that's consistent with prior year. On page 12, it lists out the reports that Deloitte will issue as a result of these audits, consistent with prior year. You have financial statement opinions, and then you have single audit opinions, and any management commentary letter if there are any comments and communications to this committee. Moving to the next slide. This just lays out the timeline for our audits. We started our planning procedures back in the fall. I believe it was October, November timeframe when Santiago and Clinton were in the field performing some of our planning procedures. And then starting next month through June, we'll have a full complement of team members working on the 2021 audit for working towards the June issuance date. The single audit last year, so 2020, OMB granted us a 6-month extension in filing the results of your single audit. That extension has gone away. So for December 31, 2020, you're back to a normal timeline for submission of single audits, which means your 2021 single audit will need to be submitted by September 30th of 2022. So September 30th, 2022, the 21 single audit needs to be submitted. No more extensions, at least not yet anyway. Moving to page 15. This just lays out some of our considerations related to COVID-19 and the impact on what we do as auditors. I talked a little bit about going concern and cash flow projections, but also because we're still in a very virtual environment, we do pay pay close attention to internal controls, making certain that if individuals who are control owners are working from home or virtually, that controls are still in place. They're not being circumvented or bypassed because someone may not be physically located in an office setting. So we do look for those type of things when we perform our control walkthroughs with management. Because most of what we do is still virtual, from an audit perspective, we do use a lot of technology and tools to conduct our audit. Deloitte has a platform, an audit platform, where it's not necessarily on a cloud base, but our audit files are all allowed to be accessed by all the team members from Deloitte. So it's a way to manage the audit efficiently. We also use Deloitte Connect to trade information with the client, Nycha's management team. So if we ask for a document, Nycha's management team would upload it into a secure Deloitte application called Deloitte Connect. We've used that in the past. It's really great to organize the request, to not lose a request, and to know when it's been satisfied. We'll continue to use that for the 2021 audits. In addition, meetings with management will continue to use Zoom, Microsoft Teams to conduct those meetings, whether it's walkthroughs or status check-ins. Moving to page 16, government auditing standards require that I share with this committee Deloitte's latest peer review report. Every 3 years, Deloitte is required to have another firm come in and perform a quality control review of how we conduct our audits and the internal control policies that Deloitte has in place. And this only pertains to our private company clients. Grant Thornton is our peer reviewer, is Deloitte's peer reviewer. And in November of 2020, Grant completed the most recent peer review and issued their report. And Deloitte received the highest possible rating, which was pass. So on pages 16, 17, 18, you will see the peer review report from Grant Thornton. And then finally, starting on page 21 through the end of the document, lists out some of the GASB pronouncements. And to your question earlier, Victor, these are all of the GASB pronouncements that have been issued, but have not yet been implemented by Nycha, because Nycha doesn't have to implement them yet. There's still some time before they have to do so. GASB 95 delayed the implementation of all technical accounting pronouncements by 12 to 18 months, gives all of our government clients a little more time to deal with COVID and the virtual environment, and not have to worry about accounting pronouncements. So for this year, there's no significant implementations of any new accounting standards. There is one that I wanted to mention. It's GASB 98. Which was recently issued, and it's effective immediately. Nycha is required to change how they describe their financial statements. In the past, Nycha described the financial statements as a comprehensive annual financial report, or CAFR. They now have to change that to annual comprehensive financial report, ACFR. So small change, but meaningful change. And so this year, when you see the full set of 2021 financial statements, you will not see the acronym CAFR used anymore.
Jill, excuse me, the GASB you just mentioned, it's not on here, right?
It's not in on pages 21 through 26. No,
Okay,
this
okay.
technical update is just meant to
Okay,
be
okay.
items to be adopted in the future.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Mark here, just one thing, on one page, let me see the page 12, you refer to a REAC submission. What's a REAC?
REAC is it's real estate assessments. Darshan, help me. It's a real estate assessment center. It's because Nycha receives HUD funding. Nycha is required to upload certain information into the REAC portal, and we issue a report associated with that upload.
Okay, I just didn't know, I never. Okay. I must say I was amused that COVID-19 looks like a mouthpiece.
Those are false teeth, Mark.
Painful.
Those are false teeth.
I'll pass that comment on to my design team. I see what you're saying.
The molar is on the right side.
Is everyone good?
Everybody's good.
Yep.
So that's it.
All right, thank you very much, Jill. Everyone is comfortable with the Deloitte audit service plan for 2021 and the single audit. We're going to go now into item number 7, which is the internal audit reports that have been issued in 2021.
And my apologies to folks, but I had just noted this because I had a previous work engagement that I'm going to be hopping off in about 15 minutes, so I don't want to interrupt, but I'll have to log off.
Okay.
Measurement. You will be in the VA according to your record tomorrow. I advise you please stop there. Get your process. I'm sorry.
All right, so in terms of our
Gentlemen over there will help.
internal audit report, just as before we go into the report itself, at the last July 2020 meeting, the audit committee approved some 40 audits to be executed. This consists of 43% of those audits, or 17, was in operational, 32% or some 13 of those audits were in compliance, and another 25% or 10 of those audits would be in financial audits, totaling 40. However, in 2020, the onset of COVID and 2020 March, internal audit department started working remotely from home. As such, with the late approval of the audit plan in 2020, July 29, this pushed us to a late start in the audit itself. As a result, we have some 13 audits that has been completed, 14 which you would have in your report. One of those audits was carried forward from 2019. We have combined some 6 of the audit report into one major audit report. And presently we have 8 of those reports in the reporting stage, and 3 IT audits, which we are now in the planning stage to be executed. So that composes the 40 audits. And out of that, we have 14 which we would be going through in this report. So the first one on slide 2, we have the administration, and we have one report, which is the audit of temporary employees payment processing. Now, the objective of this audit was to review the temporary employee augmentation of vendor agency contract. The scope of this audit period was from July 2019 to June 2020. We recognize that some 4% or approximately 500 of these employees, totaling approximately 12,500, are temporary employee as at June 2020. Agencies which we have these service contract with are such as Adil Business Services, Cogent, Discretionary, Infogene, IT Trailblazer, JSM Consulting, and Tingreen. Our report revealed that there were no deficiency noted in this process. Then we move on to the capital projects. We have two reports there, and slide 5 will indicate that the assessment of Nycha's performance on capital projects under the New York Mayor's Initiative. This was a 2019 audit. Now, this assessment focused on capital projects related to 3 mayoral initiatives. These are the roof initiatives, the facade initiative, and the heating initiative. The scope of this audit period was from the period of January 2017 through to May 2020. And the internal audit recommends that the CPD considered at least 3 references. 1, an approval of chart or matrix reflecting the level of approval needed by project types and dollar amount in the capital planning department reference guide. 2, an appendix listing the filing requirements and the system where they should be filed could provide further guidance and ensure consistent filing in this process. And the third one, the capital planning department reference guide, that is in a working draft. And we are requesting that this should be updated and approved as final. Now, internal audit recommends and also observe that the department CPD consider developing a high-level overview with the progress, trend, and any matters requiring management's attention or action, including, of course, any monthly reporting package. We recognize that the department has started to take these remedial actions at the point of our audit. Then the next audit we have is the review of additional city funding, discretionary spending. And this is from the city council members and borough president. Now this audit, the real purpose of this audit is to determine the effectiveness of the process surrounding the disbursement of additional city funding relating to discretionary funds made available by city council members and borough presidents for capital projects. The scope of this audit, it covered the period from July 1, 2019 through to 2020 in June. Now, as of June 30, 2020, the borough presidents and city council had allocated some 162 million towards various capital projects. And internal audit department was able to obtain sufficient information to support the various stages of the progress for each of the selected projects, and there were no adverse findings. Slide number 7 takes us into the compliance department, and we have 2 reports in the compliance department. The first one is the assessment of compliance to the Federal Housing and Urban Development, that is the HUD-based paint requirement. Now this is an assessment, and this assessment was to provide management with an independent evaluation of the January 2019 HUD agreement milestone achievements and any contractual obligation that is deemed to be in progress as at June 30th, 2020. The scope of this assessment, it covered the period from July 1, 2019 to June 30, 2020. And our observation is that Nycha is substantially compliant with the performing the required Nycha units, visual Nycha assessment lead-based paint abatement projects, including repairs, renovation, and paint projects per the 2019 HUD agreement. So they were in compliance. The other audit we had is the assessment of reporting on issues that relates to PHAS, that is the Public Housing Assessment System, PHAS. Now the objective, and that is slide 9, the objective of this assessment again was to determine that Nycha's Chief Compliance Officer, working in conjunction with the PHAS pillar team, had developed the appropriate control structure for preventing or detecting deceptive practices with respect to PHAS inspections and ensuring that compliance with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development regulations and guidelines with respect to PHAS inspection for the period October 2019 to September 2020. And of course, the scope of our audit was, as at September 30, 2020, there were 7 milestones, which we want to report on the status of these 7 milestones at the point of our audit. Action 1 was update standard procedure, and this was completed at the point of our audit. Action number 2, train Nycha staff, and this training has started and currently in progress. Action number 3, communication plan. This was properly documented and completed. Action number 4, establish forums for filing complaints, and this was properly set up and is completed. Action number 5, proactively identify deceptive practices, and this has been in progress at point of our audit. And number 6, investigate deceptive practices, and this was completed. And final one, action number 7, to enhance Maximo to ensure that only emergency work is performed during the PHAS REACT inspection. And this has commenced and also in progress at the time of our audit. So Internal Audit and Assessment Department recommend an effective plan that recognize that there's an effective plan is in place to ensure the completion of the remaining items in the PHAS inspection action plan. Then we move on to slide number 10, which deals with finance, the area of finance. And we have 2 reports: self-insurance assessment. And the objective of this assessment was to assess the overall process for maintaining compliance with HUD requirements in determining the funding for self-insurance fund on an annual basis. And the scope of our assessment, it covered general liability claims for the period from 2015 through to 2019. Our observation as internal auditors that risk assessment, risk management in conjunction with law, finance, and compliance department should develop a Nycha standard procedure documenting Nycha's internal practice in managing self-insurance fund. And risk management should further their request to HUD for limited waiver to utilize internal counsels instead of outside counsel for certain activities to take advantage of any potential savings that can be gained therefrom. Our next assessment is assessment of Nycha's Treasury Department, cash management, and its investment policy and procedure. Now, the objective again of this assessment was to ensure that Nycha's Treasury Department policy and procedures that ensures effective control in the cash, that is the HUD subsidy, management and optimum return on investment per current investment strategies, it adhere to the required compliance stipulated by HUD, public and Indian housing. The scope of this assessment, again, it covered the period from April 2019 to June 2020. And we recognize that Nycha's Treasury Department was in full compliance with the required policies and procedures for the cash management surrounding the operations reserves and the capital projects and investment purchase management according to the Public and Indian Housing Notice. The next area we looked at was the information and technology. And from this, we have one report. That report is the audit of cyber security email.
Excuse me for 1 minute.
Yes, Mr. Kaplan.
You've been going through this and it's interesting, but I haven't had a chance to interact, but you have here a list of the bank accounts with a huge amount of money in them. Who picks those banks for that?
If Anika is on the line, she may help us, but it certainly would have been agreed in accordance with Nycha's policy, and the management would have deemed it necessary that these were appropriate banks to place these funds.
Correct. So Terrence, if you could just tell me which specific ones, but Mr. Kaplan, in general, the Nycha Treasury Department manages all the bank accounts, and Treasury is under my purview. We have various accounts depending on the requirements related to funds. So for example, some funds are allowed to be in interest-bearing accounts, others are not. Some items need to be in escrow accounts with general depository agreements. So it really does depend on the requirements around that specific group of funding, so to speak. But happy to give you, more information, if you have a specific question on a particular account or a particular bank.
First of all, I would like to understand whether or not the auditors looked at the banks and the amounts in it against the policies. And
yes, this was done in accordance with the policy. It was reviewed in accordance with the policy.
Okay. And the second question is, these are clearly uninsured bank accounts. Are they all collateralized?
I would have to go back and check. I think it depends, but I don't want to misspeak. So let me go back and check.
Yeah, because typically, you look at other audits, it says that the policy is that it's always collateralized, and if not, the money is in a good bank, and that's monitored. I just wonder what happens here.
And we do, our Treasury team does reconcile our accounts consistently. We also have internal meetings every single month with the entire finance team. So myself, Jeff, budget, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the like, and we go through our cash flow forecast for that month. So it does have a number of different eyes on it, but I will check with our treasurer and get you that specific answer, because again, I just don't want to misspeak in this meeting.
Okay.
And I would just add, excuse me, I would just add to Anika's point is that the board votes quarterly on all the investment transactions, so they take a look at it as well.
Okay, thank you for that, gentlemen.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll continue, Mr. Kaplan. So the next audit we have here is the audit of cybersecurity email. And this audit objective was to determine the effectiveness of email cybersecurity activities against phishing or any malware attacks, including management of spam email and protecting Nycha's domain, that is nycha.nyc.gov, from any kind of email spoofing, abuse, and raising user awareness of safe email practice. During this audit, the scope was covered for the period from January 2020 to March 31st, 2021. And we ascertained that the email cybersecurity activities were performed in a satisfactory manner, and IT security personnel and email administrators are responsible for various aspects of email cybersecurity and understood that perform the task required to ensure email services were protected against any kinds of threat actors, and the task required to reduce or minimize the risk of phishing, ransomware, and other malicious activities. And this was currently in place and in practice, and we are satisfied that there is reasonable security in place. Then we move on to leased housing. We have 2 reports in this area.
Forgive me, but you have this recommendation that the phishing simulations have not been performed. Is it the intention to try to set that process up?
That process actually has started.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan.
Haven't been-
Then we have the Audit of Lease Housing Department on income discrepancies. Now, this audit objective was to determine the effectiveness of the processes in place to resolve income discrepancies noted in Section 8 Tenants Annual Recertification of Income. And the scope of the internal audit covered the period from January 2020 to December 2020. And the internal audit department found that the leased housing department is performing in a satisfactory manner in administering the income discrepancy procedures. However, the internal audit department noted the following findings and observation requiring management's attention to further enhance the process. There were 2 of them. 1, develop timeliness for actioning cases within the fraud and the abuse department. And 2, follow up for cases pending with the Office of Inspector General.
I'd like to ask a question about this. And I tell you, I have somebody who occasionally gives me a ride instead of a taxi cab from my apartment building. And he's a source of all kinds of gossip and information for me. One of which was that he said to me that in some of the projects, there's a substantial number of people who have sublet their apartments to people at a profit and thereby moved to Florida. Is there anything to that? And have you had that sort of an issue?
Well, I would have to ask the department to speak to that directly because we did not uncover that. So we want to ask the department to speak to that directly, Mr. Kaplan.
I don't know whether he spoke from authority or just a rumor, but I listened attentively.
Okay. But certainly that is something we can make note of and so plan our future audits to capture any such information.
I would just caution also that, to capture that information, it would have to usually be the subject of an IG investigation. And if it's being currently investigated, it's not something that they're going to be willing to report on.
Yeah.
I understand that too.
Thanks much, Filmer.
Excuse me, what is the extended period of time required for the OIG to actually finalize these cases? How long has that been? When you say extended time, what does that mean? 1 year, 5 years, 3 years?
Okay, there are some outstanding items that have been outstanding for months, which has been easily resolved. There may be some that may take 2 years to actually fully being resolved. But
So does that mean that somebody who has a pending case, who is a criminal, can stay in the Nycha for 2 years until OIG approves it? Or reviews it? That's a question.
I yet to think that will be the situation, Mr. Koo, especially in the case you mentioned, if there is a fraud, that would be acted upon certainly administratively immediately.
Just for clarification, Mr. Koo, this is Section 8. This is not conventional public housing, Section 9. Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So just want to clarify that point, and this has to do with recertifications. Okay, any discrepancies on the recertifications.
Okay.
Okay, and anything that rises to the level of, it being flagged for the IG to investigate.
So my question, I guess, has to do with why is it taking so long for Office of Internal Office of Inspector General to adjudicate these cases.
I mean, there could be different reasons. It depends on the type of investigation, right? And what the allegations are. Some may take longer than others.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vilma. Then the next audit on the lease housing that was conducted was the audit of lease housing department, error resolution 558. Now, the objective of this audit was to confirm that an effective internal control environment is in place to ensure that errors are properly followed up and resolved as part of the Form 558 reporting process. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development requires Nycha to electronically submit this form on a monthly basis. And this information is intended to provide HUD with information on the individuals who participate in subsidized housing program. Our audit scope covered the error resolution process undertaken for the period September 1, 2019 to February 29, 2020. And our audit disclosed no deficiency in the lease housing department process for preparing and submitting the Form 558. An effective internal control environment is in place to control and to ensure errors are detected on a prompt basis and properly followed up and corrected. Then we move on to slide 18, which we have one report for legal affairs. And this is an assessment of commercial litigation. Now, the objective of this assessment was to focus on the administrative processes performed by the Commercial Litigation Department, CLD, in managing its caseload. The scope of our assessment covered commercial litigation cases open and closed from the period 2013 through to 2020 to account for litigation life cycle. The Internal Audit Department found that the Commercial Litigation Department needs to implement certain processes to support their activities. Some of the observations that we noted were: one, to develop a commercial litigation process policy and written procedures; two, to enhance the case management process; and three, develop matrix for the department. However, it should be noted that the Commercial Litigation Department, at the point of our audit, is taking a proactive approach in implementing the related corrective actions to address the issues that were being identified. Then we come to the public safety security. We have one report in this regard. That is the audit of monitoring of workplace incidents. Now, this audit objective was to determine the effectiveness of the controls in place to ensure that staff receive workplace incidents training and workplace incidents are being monitored. And the scope of the audit covered the period from January 2020 to December 2020. Now, the Office of Safety and Security was performing their functions in a satisfactory manner. However, the following observations were noted to assist them in improving its processes. And there were four that we identified. One, that Nycha Standard Procedures Manual, Workplace Violence and Procedure, needed to be updated. Two, the risk assessment process required certain enhancement. Three, decisions needed to be made on how best to execute state and city required annual workplace violence training. And four, performance matrix should reflect the functions of the Office of Safety and Security is intending to monitor themselves against. It must be noted that the Office of Safety and Security has responded positively to these audit recommendations. They have adopted them, And they have currently addressing these observations that were noted. Then we have one report from the Tenancy Administration.
Terrence, do you mind if I just answer Mr. Kaplan's previous question on the
Sure.
collateralization of the bank accounts before you go into this next one? So Mr. Kaplan, just wanted to confirm that our bank accounts are collateralized. So all deposits in excess of the FDIC coverage of 250,000 per bank are fully collateralized, with our collateral being held in segregated custodial accounts in the authority's name. That collateral coverage is monitored and maintained daily by the Treasury Department. It can be, increased or decreased daily as necessary. And our collateral is comprised of U.S. Treasury notes and bonds, in addition to other U.S. governmental agency securities approved under the HUD guidelines. So thank you to Ayat Lee and Teresa Puccio, our treasurer, for responding quickly on that.
First class. Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you very much, Anika. So we have the Tenancy Administration. We have one report that was done. And this report was a review of tenant selection and admission procedure, that is TSAP. Now, the audit objective was to determine whether the issues raised in the Nycha Controller's audit report on Nycha's tenant selection process dated June 1, 2018, were actually and all addressed in a fulsome way. Our audit scope covered the period from January 2019 through to December 2019. And Application and Tenancy Administration Department, ATAD, and as applicable, the Management Services Department were performing in a satisfactory manner at the point of our audit and in administering the tenant selection and admission procedures. The following 5 were brought to management's attention during the time of our audit. 1, the lapse in the time between criminal background and sex offender checks and the tenant's moving date. 2, the apartment preparation delay and vacancy loss days. 3, timely removal of applicants from the waiting list. 4, applicants' rental checklist not maintained in CBIL. And 5, lack of access control to support the processing. Now, it should be noted that ATAD, upon our reviews and subsequent review, is taking a proactive approach in implementing the related corrective actions as at August 2021, when we had a meeting with the department in this matter. Then we have slide number 24, which is the waste management and pest control, final one. And we looked at the assessment of pesticide control on qualified staff. Now, this assessment, the initial objective of this assessment was to confirm that only licensed and trained exterminators are administering pesticide on Nycha's property. And this objective was expanded to include the following: a standard procedure manual was created, which incorporated integrated pest control management. We had exterminators were provided with training, and that the pest control department, PCD, assisted the borough exterminators in providing targeted relief for units with repeating pest complaints. Now, the scope of this audit, we covered the period January 2019 through to December 2019. An internal audit confirmed its primary objective, and also that the procedures are in place to ensure that exterminators administering pesticide on Nycha's property were all licensed. The internal audit department also confirmed that other initiatives that pointed out were satisfactorily addressed by the department. This brings an end to a summary of our presentation of the reports to which the members have the full detailed report.
May I ask 3 questions, Mr. Clark?
Yes, Mr.
Okay. On point number 12, the tenant selection and admissions department. You said that 12% of the applicants are on the waiting list for an extended time. What is the cause of that extended time on the waiting list? Is it because the people on whose names have deceased, or is it because they just simply haven't been gotten to yet?
There are various reasons. Some of them with insufficient information. Checks weren't done, background checks, insufficient information. I know the department can speak to that more forthrightly as to the
We don't have to
individual.
do that now, but I'm just raising that question.
Okay.
And perhaps that's the subject we should discuss during the course of
Okay, thanks.
course of our meetings. The second question I have is under project number 4, which is Pha Assessment System. Again, apparently in the report that was written, there has been no PHA inspection since 2019, since October of 2019. Again, what is the reason for that? And is that going to be, looked into and corrected in the future?
Okay, thank you for that. We'll make a note of it, Mr. Koo.
Okay.
Mr. Koo, just note that some of that was related to COVID, right? And they couldn't go into units.
Yeah, I understand. I just want to know when the process is going to restart again. That's all.
I believe they have resumed that, but Terrence will double check that.
Yes,
Okay,
we'll double check that.
Thank you. And that was it. I had raised the question earlier about the delay for the OIG. So those are my 3 questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Koo.
Thank you.
Anika, I thought your hand was raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was from previously.
Okay, thanks much. That's okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Any other comment or questions?
The dashboard, the Pha's dashboard, has it been implemented now that it's February of 2022?
I know at the time of our audit, steps have been taken to have these implemented and working comfortably. So it has started. As to the stage of the progress, we may not know right now. We may not know, but we know it has started.
It has been, it's starting.
Yes.
Can you tell me to the point of, I mean, are they almost done? The dashboard has been in effect now for almost a year, I guess. And it was, I think the last implementation or the last of any information was sometime in June of last year.
Okay, we know we have,
what the progress is.
As to the stage of completion or the stage of progress, I cannot comment on that right now, but we know it has started and the department is working in full consort with it up and running. The dashboard.
Okay, because that's going to be an integral part in moving forward. So I guess the sooner the better.
Yes, we will make a check on that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, does internal audit ever have anything to do with looking at how satisfied the federal monitor is and whether or not the internal audit is looking at the areas which he is involved with? And whether we're complying with what he wants?
We have done, yes, aspects of it, but not the complete report itself, but various aspects of it we would track to ensure that it's working and it's in progress, and that the various departments are in compliance with aspects of the monitor's agreement.
Now, do you have, is there something that shows what has been looked for and what has been accomplished? Because there's periodic severe criticism for not, whether justified or not, about our performance.
There are metrics that compliance uses to gauge the compliance with the HUD agreement. And this I know that they do on a periodic basis, which they would give a report.
So yeah, to the point that Terrence is making, Vilma, I'm not sure if you're still on the line.
Yes, I am.
Okay, great.
So just to be clear, the monitor's main focus is compliance with the HUD agreement, which has very specific areas, 5 specific areas, right? And so some of the things that audit has looked at and developed the plan was, kind of in line with when the agreement was signed, right? So the monitor is primarily working on these pillar areas with, the 3 additional units that were created as a result of the agreement, right? Compliance, environmental health and safety, and quality assurance. Okay. And then, internal audit, it, looks at, as part of their risk assessment and developing an internal audit plan, across the entire authority. So, audit's focus is not just on 5 areas, right? Those 5 major areas are the primary focus of the monitor. Hopefully that provides some clarification.
Hopefully.
Not sure if Anita adds anything.
That just brings something else to mind. So I know that, or let me put it this way. Looking at we had read the agreement, and then the federal monitor came along and started adding his own concerns that he gets from his constituents. So I know that we're very close to adhering to the agreement component part of it, but some of the things that the monitor has asked for are slightly different than what the agreement is going for, and I'm not sure whether or not we at this time are able to comply with all of that, as far as the monitors are concerned. Am I clear on that?
Were you asking a question or you were just making a statement?
I was asking a question. I know that he has put in things on top of what the agreement was asking for, or whether it was being more specific than what the agreement asked for. I know that we're complying directly to the agreement. The question is, are we addressing his concern as directly as we are the agreement? Is the question.
I'm not exactly sure what things you're referring to that is on top of the agreement, right? The agreement was like the document and the premise, the starting point. Obviously, there are things as they start trying to adhere to the agreement and the 5 pillar areas that, may not have been anticipated to be part of the agreement. And so it gets amplified, but you'd have to be a little more specific, and we're more than happy to go back and get you a response.
Okay, then what I'm gonna have to do is, I remember that the monitor had asked for certain things that we at one point were not doing, and I don't know if we ever addressed that, because I never got the second half of that. And I do know by looking at many of the things that have been implemented, such as certain committees and certain policies and stuff, that we are following the regiment of the agreement itself. There we're in compliance, or we're trying to get into total compliance. But I thought that there was other things that he had asked for, and I'm not sure whether we've addressed that. I would have to go back and try and find that the issue that he had addressed and see if those have been answered. I'll have to look into that and find out, and then maybe my question will make more sense.
Okay, happy to look into anything once you share more specifics.
Yes.
The specific is whatever the monitor had asked for that was not originally part of the agreement. That's what I have to find out. I remember seeing it. He wrote it, he sent it into the authority, but I don't remember the specifics. So I'll have to go back and see if I can find that.
Okay, Terrence, please move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Okay.
Any other comment, questions? If not,
The only,
Yeah, the meeting is, it's 12 o'clock, so I just want to be mindful of
12
people's
o'clock.
time, right?
Thank you.
in response to Mr. Kaplan's question, the only one report that I can see that internal audit is doing is the pesticide related question. The others are not related necessarily directly to the HUD agreement, but the pesticide does touch on it.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Fu.
No, there's also FAS inspections.
FAS
I believe
inspection.
FAS is part of the agreement as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Terrence?
Okay, thank you. All right, no further item to be discussed. A
Mr.
motion is in.
How many people are in the internal audit department?
Presently, we have an audit staff complement of 10.
10. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mr. Kaplan. All right, no other matters here to be discussed. A motion is in order for the adjournment.
So move.
Oh, wait,
Thank
so
you.
our executive session,
Do we need it?
I don't,
I would like to ask the auditor something.
Okay, then I have to.
Well, listen, if you postpone, it's all right. I would,
No. If you have a question for them, then I guess we'll have to go through it. So I guess now is the time. I move that the audit committee meet in the executive session to discuss non-public financial matters of the authority with the independent auditors, Deloitte and Touche.
Okay, that's been moved. Is there a second?
second.
All those who are in favor, let me hear you. Members
Aye.
responding. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have members respond. Now the audit committee will now proceed into an executive session.
he left the meeting due to technical issues. But he did speak with Mr. Koo, and he agreed that we can
Adjourn.
adjourn the meeting. Now,
Right.
my question to you is this: can we adjourn without him being present?
Ideally, it would be good for him to be here. If he can join, it would only be appropriate because only 50% of the membership we have.
Richard, can you give him a call back? Tell him to get back on?
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Somebody should have told him not to leave.
I don't
Well,
think that was even an option. He was clicking on
yeah,
something
thank you.
saying that, yeah, unfortunately, that wasn't gonna happen. Because he had just disappeared. I didn't see his video anymore, so, and I didn't see him in the panelist tab.
Yeah.
So I made the assumption that he had clicked on the link and gotten into the executive session. So
He got frustrated because he couldn't get on executive session, so,
sure.
you know.
I'm dialing and no answer.
Rip, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you can hear me. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to disconnect. I've gone past the time that I was scheduled to be in. Is there anything else that I'll as soon as my local recording finishes, I will send it to you.
Hi, Mark. Please get back onto the websites.
Rip, you'll need to stay on managing the meeting until we officially adjourn.
That's correct. I'll stay on.
My
Thank you.
apologies, folks.
Well, we've gotten the verbal approval from Mr. Kaplan to adjourn the meeting. So
We should try to get in touch with him because right now you don't have.
I'm trying to.
Okay,
but he's
so
not-
I will try
he's
him.
not
I will
answering.
try him.
You try it, okay. Yeah, hi, could you please get back onto the meeting? We need you to adjourn the meeting. Yeah, could you go back on again, please? Okay, I spoke to him and he said he's gonna go back, try to get back on if he can figure out how. So please have somebody from IT call him and make sure he can get back on. Rick, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Or
Rick,
or are
no,
you asking
you're
for Rip to
Euripides.
call him?
Rip.
Rip,
All right, I'll call him.
Call
Yeah,
him, please.
Thank you, Mr. Koo.
Thank you. You'll have to walk him through to get back.
yeah.
It's amazing. Darshan had a whole speech for us. Amazing.
Yeah, we never got to hear it.
Yeah, we never heard a speech, right? Wow. Maybe next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're on mute, Darshan.
I'm sorry?
I can give you a good update of what is going on.
No, thank you. We just spent 2
You mean
hours.
what's going on right now or what's going
Yeah.
on with
CARES funding is the government is like throwing things out there
yeah.
and
We're on
high
public.
risk and low risk. and-
Darshan, we're no longer an executive. We're back on public. And
Oh,
we're
I see.
being recorded.
I
So-
Right.
So
I got you.
unless you have something related to the meeting, I wouldn't
No.
suggest we discuss anything else
Mm.
of a non-public nature. Or public. Thank you. Mr. Kaplan is.
I'm here.
Good.
Here we go.
Okay, Victor, you want to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
I'm sorry, guys.
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you very
Kaplan?
much.
Mr. Kaplan, are you in favor of adjourning? We
in
need aye
favor of
from all
adjourning.
members.
We have 3 out of the 4 members.
Did Mr. Kaplan say aye?
I
Yes.
did twice.
Yes,
Yes, he just did.
Yes.
okay. So the meeting is adjourned.
Turn. Okay, thank you all very much, members, and all,
you.
everyone who
Give
has
me a-
participated.
Give me an official time.
Time now is 12:24.
Okay,
Meeting has come to a close. Thank you very much.
thank you.
And Mr.
you, Mark.
Clark, thank you.
Thank you all.
Mr.
Thank
Clark,
you,
you will
Mr. Clark.
send us a follow-up memo of